Electronegativity is the reason why water molecules are polar. The electronegativity of oxygen is higher than the electronegativity of hydrogen, so the shared electrons in the covalent bonds are not equally shared and spend more time with oxygen than hydrogen. This creates a partially negative charge on the oxygen atom and partially positive charges on the two hydrogen atoms. Amphipathic property means a structure possesses both hydrophilic and hydrophobic properties. This is a specific feature for phospholipid. This is the phosphate head, and it is hydrophilic because it has charge. These two are fatty acid tails, and they are hydrophobic.
Cellulose is made of beta-glucose only. Beta-glucose molecules join together by 1,4-glycosidic linkage to form a linear structure. The graph shows the effect of light intensity on the rate of photosynthesis of a green plant at low and high carbon dioxide concentrations. Besides light intensity and carbon dioxide concentration, other factors are controlled such as temperature and the amount of chlorophyll. So they are not the limiting factors for this experiment. At X, the rate of photosynthesis remains constant when light intensity increases. So light intensity is not a limiting factor. Carbon dioxide concentration is a limiting factor at X because when the concentration increases, the rate of photosynthesis increases. The diagram shows the formation of an enzyme-substrate complex. When the substrate is approaching the active site, the shape of the active site changes in order to allow the substrate to fit in to form the enzyme-substrate complex. This model explains how enzymes work in the induced fit model.
Translation is the second step in protein synthesis. Messenger RNA, formed in transcription, moves to ribosomes, which is the organelle to produce proteins. mRNA contains codons, which are triplet codes that code for specific amino acids. tRNA, or transfer RNA, transfers specific amino acids to ribosomes to produce proteins. There is an anticodon in each tRNA, and it forms complementary base pairing with codons on mRNA. This base pairing mechanism is to ensure the amino acid is the correct amino acid for protein synthesis. RNA polymerase is the enzyme that transcribes DNA to form mRNA in transcription, which is the first step of protein synthesis.
DNA profiling is an experiment to identify the origin of DNA from an individual, so it is used for paternity testing and forensic investigation. When we look at the DNA bands from the child, these bands are shared with the mother. The remaining bands are shared with person B. So person B is most likely the father of the child. Among all choices in option A to D, they are all eukaryotic cells. The eukaryotic cells that contain cell wall are fungi, plant and protist, and animal cells do not have cell wall. Plastids are organelles that contain pigments and food storage, and one of the examples is chloroplast. Since only Y has plastids, Y would represent plant. Cell recognition is a function of glycoprotein, which is a membrane protein. This is a glycoprotein because there is a carbohydrate region exposed on the surface of the membrane. B is the hydrophobic tail of a phospholipid, while C is the cholesterol in the membrane. Structure D is an integral protein. It could be a protein pump or a channel protein.
This is the descending order of potency among these stem cells. The totipotent stem has the highest potency to form any cell type. Zygotes and 2 to 8 cell embryos are totipotent stem cells. Cells in later embryos are pluripotent. They can also form a wide range of body cells. Bone marrow is a typical example for the multipotent stem cell. They can form a group of related cells. Unipotent stem cells can only form one specific cell type, for example, skin cell and liver cell.
This cell shows the moment when chromosomes are separating during cell division. This is a major event that happens in anaphase.
A normal blood cell has a spherical shape. However, the diagram shows blood cells are crenate. This is because the blood cells have been placed in a hypertonic solution, which has a higher solute concentration than the cell. So water in the blood cell diffuses out, and the cell will shrink.
When we have to study the two different inheritance patterns, one is either autosomal or sex linkage, and the other one is either dominant or recessive, we first have to study whether the trait is a dominant or recessive trait. When we look at these two non-affected parents, they can produce an affected son. This result shows that the two parents are heterozygous because only heterozygous parents can produce offspring with different traits. Since these two parents are heterozygous and non-affected, the affected trait is a recessive trait. The second step is to determine if the trait is sex linkage or autosomal. Since the trait is a recessive trait, if the trait is sex linkage, the genotype of this mother would be XAXA. She would pass her X chromosome to her son. So that means her son's genotype must be XAY, an affected male. However, both of her sons are non-affected, so the trait would not be sex linkage, and it must be autosomal. Vital capacity is the maximum volume of air that lungs can breathe in or breathe out. Based on the graph, this is the vital capacity, which is 65 milliliter per kg. Veins carry blood back to the heart. So they carry low blood pressure. So veins must have valves to prevent blood backflow due to low blood pressure. Veins also have thin wall to have a larger lumen to carry more blood back to the heart. Pineal gland and adrenal gland are both parts of the endocrine system because they both secrete hormones. Pineal gland secretes melatonin, while adrenal gland secretes epinephrine. Melatonin controls circadian rhythm, while epinephrine prepares the body for vigorous activities such as increasing the breathing rate and heart rate. Effector is the structure that can respond to the change in the body. So it would be either skeletal muscle or pineal gland. Since it is about the effector of a pain reflex arc, the effector would be skeletal muscle because skeletal muscle will have to contract in order to remove your body from dangers. Pineal gland is a structure that secretes hormones. The effects of hormones are too slow to respond to dangers.
The innate immune system is always available to protect the body, and it responds to any type of antigen. Phagocytes always undergo phagocytosis to engulf antigen. The other three choices are adaptive immunity. They only respond to a specific antigen, for example, producing a specific antibody.
This is the labeled diagram of the male reproductive system, so option A is the correct answer. When a red flower crosses with a white flower, pink flowers are produced. This shows the inheritance pattern of flower color for this plant is incomplete dominance. The genotype of F1 generation is heterozygous. When 2F1 generation crosses to form F2 generation, the phenotype of F2 generation can be determined by this Punnett square. The peripheral thermoreceptors under the skin detects the increase in environmental temperature. The receptors send nerve impulses to the hypothalamus to respond to the change in the temperature. There are several responses such as vasodilation and sweating. Vasodilation means transporting more blood to the skin surface to increase heat loss. These two animals look very similar, however, they are different species. One is aquatic reptile, and the other one is a mammal. They both have streamlined bodies because they both need these adaptations to survive in a similar environment. This is an example of analogous structures, which have different structures but perform similar functions. This is an evidence for convergent evolution, which two different species evolve in a similar pattern. The arrival of humans in New Zealand caused the extinction of this flightless bird. This is because humans hunted them for food.
Abiotic factors refer to non-living factors such as temperatures, light intensity, and salinity. The other choices refer to biotic factors, which are living factors.
Two species can have a competitive relationship because they have similar ecological niches, for example, similar diets. However, they cannot coexist in the same niche, so they have to compete to live in the same area. The weaker species can adjust its niche to continue to stay in the same area with the stronger species. However, the weaker species are unable to adjust their niches, and they have to leave the area to look for a better location.
A capture-mark-release-recapture experiment can estimate the size of a population. The equation is the number of first capture multiplied by the number of second capture and divided by the number of marked individuals in the second capture. So the estimated number of these periwinkles is 500. The paradise tree produces a chemical called allanthone which inhibits the growth of other plants. This chemical is an example of secondary metabolite because it affects the growth of another organism. This shows allelopathy, a mechanism to compete the resources with other organisms. In ecosystems, there are different ways for organisms to obtain energy. For example, humans use the oxidation of organic substances to obtain energy, so humans are regarded as chemoheterotrophs. The organisms that use oxidation of simple inorganic substances as an energy source is regarded as chemoautotrophs. John Endler's experiment is a typical model to study how various selective pressures are acting on living organisms. Male guppies with bright, colorful bodies can easily attract female guppies, so they are easier to mate and pass on the allele for bright color body traits to the next generation. However, male guppies with bright, colorful bodies are more susceptible to predation, so it will lower the frequency of allele for bright color body traits. Eutrophication is caused by excess nutrients in rivers. The presence of excess nutrients causes an algal bloom, an increase in alga population. Algae covers the water surface and prevents light from penetrating. This kills the aquatic plants and increases the amount of dead matter in water. So the size of bacterial population increases to decompose the dead matter, and it will cause the oxygen levels to drop.